Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first of a series of 3 webinars focused around DE&I. Today's session will be answering or looking at the question, why DE&I in recruitment makes business sense. My name is James Pratt, and I have a consultative role at TriPad, working with prospective partners who want to use technology to enable a faster, fairer, and better recruitment process. As an organisation at TriPad, we are committed to making a contribution to the recruitment sector in supporting fairer processes, and that's why we've published our third Stop the Bias report very recently. Everyone who should be seeing this should have access to a copy of that report. However, if you do not or have fallen through the net, please do get in touch and reach out and we can get a copy to you. Equally, if you would after the session be interested in talking more about how our technology could support organisations to hire in a fairer way, again, please do reach out. I'll be manning the chat today with our team of experts. So please do put any comments in there or any questions, and I'll try and get to those and bring those out into the discussion. But what I'm going to do now is hand over to Mitra, who will be hosting the session for us today. Mitra, please take it away.
Thank you, James. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the conversation today. My name's Mitra Rowe, and I run a company called Starling Business Solutions, working in partnership today and for the next next 2 sessions around this topic, specifically looking at improving hiring practices. Today's conversation really, I want us to cut through the noise in today's session, talking about not so much who gets the job and who doesn't get the job, but really kind of what we are doing about it, what organizations are doing about it. I'm going to be referring to and looking at year on year kind of the reports for the Stop the Bias report, and pulling out some of the key differences. And today I'm joined by some amazing panelists, some fantastic people who are really kind of they live and they breathe this work day to day. They're at the sharp end of it. I'm joined by Jane Hatton, who's the CEO of Even Break, a social enterprise that specialises in job boards that are designed to connect people with inclusive employers with people who are talented disabled job seekers. That we also have Michael Corrigan, who is the CEO of a second chance organisation for marginalised and disadvantaged people, which is the Bridge of Hope Careers. And then we're also joined by Roisin Johnson, who's an independent HR transformation consultant who works with and helps businesses to build hiring systems that actually work for people, so as part of their transformation process. All of these lovely people will be bringing their lived experience with them. Each of them have got the story to tell, and a bit of truth telling really around what actually happens and what goes on in real life. So let's get started. I suppose that the best place to start is to look at what we mean by fairness. That word gets thrown around an awful lot in recruitment, in progression across organisations generally. But what does it actually mean? The report, the Stop the Bias report, shows just how much that idea is really evolving. 2024's report was really focused on candidate fear, I would say. 89% of people believe that something about them, their ability, their age, their mental health, accent, even weight, could count against them when they were applying for jobs. So there was kind of it was focused on the candidate's voice and fear. This year, the report looks at moving from fear to action, I would say. And these are my sort of words, by the way. I think I should just caveat, all of these things are my insights I've drawn out and I want to explore with the panel members today and see what their thoughts are. So as I say, it moves from candidate fear to action. What are the practical tools? It's not just about ideals, is it? It's how can we build fairness into the processes that we have. Now, I will sort of caveat this again by saying we're not going to be talking about processes and systems and policies today. I really want it to be a real talk, and I guess that's where the sort of backdrop of the report, as well as the tools that are available and the systems through TriPad, are going to be something that we can come back to and look at in terms of what it is that can help to do this. But I'm going to start out by asking the question, who's being left out and why, right? So we know disabled candidates, older candidates, people from underrepresented groups, anyone with a gap in their CV or non-traditional sort of background, typically kind of can be discounted. And the real kicker is that many more of these apply and try harder, but still don't make it through. Okay, because the system is often not built for them or with them in mind. So I'm going to go first to Michael and say, or ask you to sort of share with me, what do you think, or what do you wish more employers understood about your candidates?
I'm not sure if have we lost Michael?
We might have, Can I ask the same question of you, Jane?
Yeah, for sure. Repeat the question, sorry.
That's okay. What do you wish that most employers or employers knew or understood about your candidates?
Yeah, I think for me, it's very much around, there's been a real big pushback against DE&I, hasn't there, in America and that sort of traveling further across the world. And I think for me, it shouldn't be about characteristics. It should be about talent. And the reality is that talent is spread across the whole of the population. It's not just lodging in certain parts of the population. But what we tend to do as employers is think about what does an engineer look like? What does a admin assistant look like? What does a CEO look like? And so we have in our minds kind of, right, well, a CEO is going to be I think there's evidence that suggests this, taller, white, non-disabled, cis, straight man. And if in our mind, that's what a CEO looks like, that's what we're going to be looking for, in which case we're discriminating against shorter, white, non-disabled cis men, for example. Or if we think an admin assistant looks like a young white woman, then we're going to be looking for a young white woman. Or if we think an engineer looks like, and so on and so on. But actually, anybody in the population may have the ability to do any of those jobs. So for me, it's about making sure that if we're looking for a CEO or an engineer or an admin assistant, we're looking for the skills that those roles need. And that will come in all shapes and sizes and colours. And so rather than making a predetermined kind of idea about what that person will look like or be like or behave like, we need to be thinking about what do we need them to be able to do? What are the behaviours that we need them to be able to exhibit? What are the skills that they need? Rather than what are they going to look like or what gender are they going to be or how old are they? And, we all have biases, don't we? I mean, my own bias, which is completely unfounded, is age. I'm at the older spectrum, as you can probably tell. But we had somebody join the team recently who's 25. And if I'm honest, my brain said, it was quite a senior position. She's 25. What life experience will she have? Will she have anything to bring with her? And she joined the organization, and oh my goodness, I have learnt so much from her that I didn't know before. And we made her a director very, very soon after she joined because of what she can bring to the team. And I think it's that. It's not about thinking someone's got to be a certain age or a certain gender or a certain color. It's about what skills do we need for that organization, for that particular skill set, what are the skills that we need. And it's not about life experience. It's not about years of experience in a particular role. It's not even about somebody being in the same sector. It's very much about what do we need. And if we don't do that, we're missing out on all of that talent that sits outside of the very fixed view we've got about what an engineer looks like or what an admin assistant looks like or what a CEO looks like. And we're not necessarily going to get the best person because we're immediately eliminating the people who might be the best people.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I think the generational inclusion, I've talked a lot about this with people, that the difference that perspectives and expectations have as well, that really impact when you're hiring or when you're promoting people in organizations. It's something we don't often spend enough time on and looking at the impact of that. So yeah, thank you. That's really useful to kind of hear your point of view on that. Michael, I think we've got you back now. We posed a question before we'd lost you, just to ask you what your thoughts were. I don't know how much you've heard, so I won't go back and ask that same question again, but we'll pick up in a moment and ask you to sort of give us your perspective. Roisin, I wonder if you can tell me where you think that bias still sneaks in recruitment.
Okay, so it's I mean, it's really easy for individuals, as has just been said, it's really easy for your own biases to slip in there, and life experience as well. There's a lot of times when people come to me. I mean, I've spoken to lots and lots of line managers where they have concerns about, for example, hiring a woman of childbearing age. They're worried about bringing them in, getting them set up, and that concern. What if they go off and have a baby? So we've got to got to be really pragmatic about these things. And I think the difficulty that we've got is you can never get rid of the bias. I think that's one thing that we need to be honest about. There's always going to be some level of bias, but what can we do to avoid it as much as possible, I think, is the key aim there. And I mean, for me, I think really setting up your line managers to be able to assess skills. So doing skills-based recruitment is a massive way that you can ensure that you are looking for the right people and not necessarily looking for that persona, as Jane was saying, because it is really easy. When you think of a teacher, you think of a middle-aged man, probably got leather elbow pads, from the olden days, and that's what you kind of think of if you think of a professor or a teacher, for example. So it's one of those things where we have got things ingrained in our minds, and I think it's just accepting that there is a bias there, and then making sure that when you are making decisions, back it up with data, back it up with, are these people actually skilled to do the job? That's the thing you need to be focusing on, not what they look like, where they come from, how they speak, any of those things. That's the big thing that I think we need to push.
Yeah, right person, right role. So having diversity and being inclusive isn't about focusing on and just drilling down to get a certain type of person. Quite the opposite. It's about making it a much more equitable process, so that everybody has that same starting point that they can go from. And in doing that, it means actually you've got to make some adjustments, you've got to make some shifts, and there are some quick wins, don't you think? Right?
Absolutely. And I think the thing that Jane touched on, obviously there's been a massive push to push DEI out of the way. And for me, in the way that I work, I barely mention DEI, if I'm honest. It's just sort of woven into the stuff that I do and the way that I do things and the way that the businesses I work with end up doing things. So it's not an add-on, it's almost just the way things are, the way things are done. And I think that that's probably one of the things that many HR practitioners may need to start and think about, given that there is that push against DEI. It's not a great place to be at the moment from an economic point of view. People don't want to be spending money on these things. However, what they need to realize is if you don't spend the money on, if you don't actually take on the sort of the ideas and the ways of working that a DEI practitioner would bring to your business, particularly within your recruitment piece, you're going to be missing out, and you're going to be spending more money on the wrong people in the wrong jobs with the wrong mix of people. And actually, that's shooting yourself in the foot. From a bottom line point of view, you're wasting more money by ignoring DEI than you are by including it.
Thank you. Michael, I'm not sure if you're able to add, or if you want to add any additional comments to that, now that you've been able to join back in. We were talking about who gets missed and why. I think we might be having some technical issues there, not to worry. Just to kind of cap this point off, before I kind of pick up on the next bit that I wanted to highlight, I wonder, back to you again, Jane, what are the barriers that most often show up, do you think, for your candidates?
Yeah, it's probably not the ones you think it will be. We did some research some years ago around, this was specifically around disability, but I think it applies to other groups as well, about what are the biggest barriers you face when you're looking for work. There were over 700 disabled people who are currently looking for work that were surveyed. And maybe surprisingly, the biggest barrier, they said, was we don't know which employer is going to take us seriously. Because every employer says we are an equal opportunities employer, we are an inclusive employer. But actually what they found was that as soon as the employer found out that they had a disability, whether it was visible at interview, whether it was mentioned on application, that was the moment they got rejected. So they said, we don't know who to trust. We don't know which employers are really taking this seriously. And I think that will apply for other groups as well. You know, if you're an ex-offender, or if you're an older person, or if you're gay, or if you're a woman, or whatever it might be, how do I know as a candidate which organisation is serious about inclusion and fairness and which ones are just paying it lip service? And so that was one of the biggest barriers. The next biggest barrier, far less surprisingly, was the recruitment process itself. And I think there are lots of things within the recruitment process which will disadvantage, you know, quite a lot of people. And I think, you know, we tend to use very traditionally CVs to shortlist and interviews to make the hiring decision. And I think there are problems with both of those. So, for example, a CV, I mean, we know that a CV that has personal details on it. So, for example, we know that a John is much more likely to be shortlisted than a Mohammed. We know that a John is much more likely to be shortlisted than a Susan, for example. But you can take all of those away. You can make them sort of blind CVs. But even then, there's a problem, because what's left are qualifications and work history. And if you are someone who has been discriminated against because of your skin color, your disability, your gender, whatever reason, then your work history isn't going to look as impressive as someone who hasn't been discriminated against. But as a recruiter, I might have all these CVs in front of me and think, well, those have got a really impressive work history. They've worked at really big firms. They've had really senior roles. These other people, not so much. But it might be nothing to do with their ability. It might be they've just never been given the opportunity to do those jobs and prove themselves in those roles. And similarly, I think with interviews, it's very much around, you know, we all know that people who do really well at interviews tend to be extrovert, confident, articulate, people with good body language and all of that kind of stuff that do well at interviews. But the people who match those descriptions aren't necessarily going to be the best person for the job. You know, if you want someone who's good at programming, you want someone who's good at programming, not someone who's good at blagging at interviews. And so I think there are ways that we can change the process that makes it much more equitable. And as you said before, skills-based. So instead of looking at what have you done historically, we're looking at what can you do for us moving forward, which is much more about future potential than past privilege. So I think there are lots, and we can discuss them, I'm sure we will later on, about what some of those alternatives might be. But I think the recruitment process itself is problematic. And then alongside that is a lot of hiring managers will have the bias that we've just been talking about. So somebody will apply from a different sector or, you know, from a different demographic than they're expecting. And then immediately you start thinking, well, this person isn't going to be good for this job because of the bias. And then you're looking for things to prove that confirmation bias. You're looking for things to prove that, well, I told you women would be no good in this role or whatever it is. So it is really, for me, very much as Rosine said, it's about how do we have recruitment processes that eliminate the potential for bias as much as we can. Because as an individual, that's a really hard thing to do. But if we have a process where we don't know the gender or the name or the age or whatever of the person who's applying, and we don't even know their work history, we just know what skills they have, then the only way we can shortlist those candidates is by which of these candidates have the skills we're looking for. And that's all we should be shortlisting on. We shouldn't be shortlisting on any other basis, like how long they've been in a previous job or, you know, what their sexual orientation is. It bears no relation to their ability or otherwise to do a job.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, applicant tracking systems really help to remove some of these hurdles, right, don't they? Whether it's, you know, accessible applications and bias-free workflows, or tracking where candidates from marginalised groups drop off, for example. They're really useful. These are all things that we say when we recommend as practitioners, start to track the data. That's always, and you know, I know all of you will back me up on this, that's always a challenge for organisations, particularly those that have grown rapidly, or even the smaller ones, tracking that data, that information, kind of knowing what you already have. So, you know, that's a really good starting point to be able to start tracking that information so that you can then come back to report on it, right? But I mean, those quick wins that you were talking about just there, like anonymous CVs, I mean, I see those as quick wins, you know, anonymous CVs and, you know, changing the language on your job adverts. The report, this, you know, kind of talks about how inclusive language in job descriptions is really critical, and removing unnecessary requirements and advertising in more diverse spaces. Those sorts of things are all kind of supported directly by the platforms, and certainly kind of Tripad platform. But the thing that kind of comes back to my mind is, so where is it that things are falling over? You can have these processes and systems all set up, but what is it that the hiring teams can do? Like one change they can make that would make all of this much fairer. Yeah, Michael, I'm going to come to you. Have we still got Michael? I keep going back to Michael and he's not there. Apologies. Roisin, I'm going to come back to you. What do you think hiring teams can do? One thing that can make a big difference in terms of fairer hiring outside of what we talked about?
So I do think, I mean, one of the big things that I think is a challenge, and this is from my own perspective. So I, you know, technically work within human resources. It's nearly all women, and I kind of feel like a fraud in some ways, because I'm actually in the middle of a career really that is largely women, and we are trying to promote this, yet we're doing nothing about it within our own sector. It's a very, you know, very unusual sort of situation to be in. But I would say look at your gaps, and I don't mean go out and try and fill those gaps with someone that, you know, ticks the box of being, you know, a Black disabled woman, for example. It doesn't need to be as specific as that, but I do really think moving towards that skills-based approach is really what we need to do as, you know, just good recruitment practice, because it is so much better, so much fairer looking at that skill set versus a really good job description. I think maybe that great job description. Get a good job description that's skills-based, so you know what you're looking for before you go out to market.
Brilliant, thank you. Jane, do you have that one thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the job design really is the important thing. So if we are saying every job that we are advertising or trying to fill has to be done full-time, Monday to Friday, on site, you're really limiting the number of people who might apply. So there may be people who would prefer to work part-time or would prefer to do hybrid working or whatever it might be. So I think it's the job, even before the job description, it's the job design itself. Can this job be done part-time? Can it be done from home? Can it be done remotely? Some or all of it. And then you can start thinking about what are the skills that we need. And really building on what Roisin was just saying, at Even Break, we only employ disabled people. We're a disability-specific job board. We make sure that everybody that works at Even Break has lived experience of the barriers that disabled candidates face. But we also recognise that disability comes in all shapes and sizes, and we don't just want to help disabled white men. We want to help anybody who's disabled. And we use a recruitment process which doesn't use CVs and doesn't use interviews, and is purely based on skills. And so almost by accident, when I look at our team, it is so diverse in other ways outside of disability. So we have people who are, as I mentioned before, very young, oldies like me. We also have almost a 50-50 balance of male and female. We have a number of non-binary people within the organisation. We have people from different cultures. And although we haven't actively gone out to do that, because we've purely been looking at somebody's ability to do the job, that bias hasn't crept in. It turns out that the best person to do that account manager's job happens to be a Muslim man, for example. But we weren't going out saying to Muslim men, come and work at Even Break. We were saying we need somebody with these skills. So I think it is that it's not positive discrimination, but it is positive action. It's about making sure that a diverse range of people know that you are open to their talent. So I think my one, and it's a bit biased, I suppose, in some ways, is think about where you advertise, because if you advertise in the same places, you're going to get the same kind of candidates. If you want diverse candidates, you need to advertise in different places. So I think it would be look at where you advertise as well as how you word those adverts, obviously, as you mentioned before.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you're so right, or both of you, about targets, diversity targets. When I work with organizations and we create a strategy, a D&I strategy, it links in back into the business strategy. So it should be saying, here's what we need as a business to help us be successful. And here's the kind of people that will do that for us, the types of roles and skills that we need. And that's what it's about, as opposed to the person or the fit, the picture of what they believe the person to be. So whilst it's useful to have an understanding of, we want to create a greater diversity of thinking. We want to, be inclusive and making sure that we have an equitable recruitment process and hiring process. It's not about the actual kind of metrics around, we must have 10% of our population being X or Y. However, it's really important to have a baseline. If you don't have a baseline, you don't have a system that's going to allow you to track this information, how are you then going to know whether you're progressing, moving forward, doing more or less of something? It's kind of commercial practice that is done with all other things. So why don't we do it with kind of recruitment and progression? Often I get, I sort of hear, and we'll touch on this topic a little bit later. I hear, oh, well, it's important, but it's not a priority, or it's a priority, but we can't focus on that right now because we have other priorities. And so, we'll talk about that in a second. And I think just to sort of, again, cap off this conversation, whilst these quick wins that we're talking about sound really simple and sound really straightforward, not everybody has the time or the resource internally to focus their attention on it. And not everybody's got a budget even, particularly now in the current market, in the current landscape, for any kind of mini or full scale review and overhaul. And it does take time, because in saying something like, change the language of your job adverts, go to a different spaces to recruit and advertise and market and look for people, that in itself is automatically adding on additional workload to those individuals and those organizations. So I think there is that balance between small things that can make a big significant shift and change, that sometimes need a little bit of help initially. So from experts like, people on this panel, and then other times there are things that they can do themselves directly by having a system in place that can support that alongside other things. But it's a case of, you don't know what you don't know. If you're not going to those organizations, if you're not going to those spaces, it's because you don't know they exist. I, for example, Jane, didn't know Even Break existed until I saw you speak earlier this year at a conference, at a D&I Leaders Conference, which was amazing. And I remember making a note there and then saying, oh my God, I had to get in touch with these people. And because clients that I speak to are often asking me those questions, where do we go? Who can we talk to? So it was great to hear you speak on that day. And I think your journey into this is also, that lived experience you have, is really powerful. And would you mind sharing a little bit about your journey?
Yeah, no, that's fine. It's an ironic journey. So I was in the field of diversity and inclusion, have been for many, many years. As you can see, I'm very old. But I wasn't disabled. I didn't have lived experience of disability. And I would be talking to employers about diversity across the board, or, inclusion generally. But when I spoke specifically about disability, there was very much a kind of, well, why would I want to employ a disabled person? Or even, we want to employ disabled people, but we don't know how, and they don't apply. And I remember thinking, somebody should do something about that. And when I spoke to disabled people, then they were saying, well, as I said before, we don't know the difference between which organisations are which ones will take us seriously. And I remember feeling frustrated and thinking, someone should do something about that. And then, ironically, I then became disabled. So I had a spinal condition, which I won't bore anybody with, and a series of spinal surgeries, which actually ended up with me not being able to walk or stand or even sit. So I was lying flat in bed with my laptop suspended above me, thinking, now what? And then I came back to thinking about this whole, oh, I am a disabled person now. So this is a bit more up and close and personal than it was before. And nobody is doing anything about it. So maybe I should. And that's how I started Even Break, literally lying flat with a laptop suspended above me. I mean, that was 14 years ago. And I'm much more mobile now, and Even Break is global and I'm able to travel. But it took me 7 years to get from lying down, not being able to walk, to being mobile again. And that lived experience, I think, is vital, because even though I was in the field of D&I before becoming disabled, it's very different when it does affect you. It's
Yeah,
about,
different lens completely that you look through, isn't it?
and stupid things like I thought, you know, that I would be the best person to become disabled because I knew that disabled people had a lot to offer, good employees. But of course, when it happens to you, it's very different. And for I think about 2 years, I just felt useless because society has so successfully ingrained in us all that disabled people are somehow less than non-disabled people. It's almost at a gut level that I started thinking, I'm not as good as other people now I'm disabled. And it took me a long time to start thinking, well, actually, I've got the same amount of knowledge that I had before. I've got the same experience I have before. I'm not looking for a job as a marathon runner, so that doesn't matter. I can still do stuff I did before. I'm just going to have to do it differently. But it takes a long time to overcome that internalized ableism that I'd grown up with and that we all grow up with. Like we all grow up with that kind of internalized racism and sexism and homophobia, even if it affects us personally. And yeah, so I learned a lot from that experience. And I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but in some weird ways, I'm glad it happened because if it hadn't, Even Break wouldn't exist. I mean, I hope somebody else would have come up with a similar idea, but I'm very proud of what Even Break has achieved since then. You know, we employ a lot of disabled people, we're covering the world, and we're actually demonstrating that disabled people are great in the workplace because Even Break wouldn't be where it is if it wasn't for that team of disabled people.
Yeah, and you know, kind of to your point there, it's necessity, which is the mother of
Yeah.
invention, isn't it? You know, it's kind of unless you are experiencing it or feeling it, sometimes you don't need to know that you've got to look for it.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jane. And Michael, I'm really hoping that we've got sight and vision here, because I'd like to bring you into the conversation here and ask you for your perspective on the challenges that you face and how you know, kind of your journey into this space, because we've looked at it. Often we talk about diversity from ability, disability, hidden and visible disabilities, but we don't talk about second chances with your story. And I'm really want to share with the listeners your journey and kind of, you know, some of the challenges faced there.
Sure. Well, firstly, Mitra, thank you for your patience. I feel doubly or trebly marginalised and disadvantaged at the moment because in our office, it now turns out that on group-wide Zoom calls, we get kicked out after 7 minutes on a repeated basis. So I'm now having to stand on the street corner and talk to you with this wonderful background behind me. But listen, I'm very happy to tell you my story. It's an unusual story. So obviously, apart from being a body double for George Clooney in movies, I got to my mid-40s and I'd had various careers. I'd been a butler originally. I'd worked for the government. I joined Deloitte. I became a partner at Deloitte. I'd done banking work. I then went to join a Nigerian bank, and it did turn sour from there. I ended up being charged with a banking offence and spending a year in Brixton Prison. And that was the moment of change in my life, to focus on social value, perhaps more so than commercial value. I found myself in Brixton Prison, surrounded by 800 other men, who were largely being let down by society. I'm sure that Jane has just mentioned that, and in some of her points that she talked about the establishment of Even Break, which is such an amazing organisation, you can hear this. But people and organisations came into the prison to meet employees, potential employees, prisoners, and would then never follow through on anything, never provide real opportunities. And people largely left the prison, and then if they didn't have a job, within a couple of months, they came back into the prison, revolving circle. So I, spending quite some time there, got involved in a project of daily release for prisoners from the prison. So providing they passed various security protocols, people could hold down a job, be that working on a construction site, working in hospitality. I was the biggest supplier of tattoo artists on the Streatham High Road. We supplied people to work in charity administration, to work for the government, to work for the BBC, work in hotels. And I helped people inside to get their CVs in the right order, understand how an interview was going to go. And then we invited into the prison, which was a really cool idea, employers to have an employer's jobs fair inside the prison. And you can recruit somebody right there, right now, and they can work for you while they're finishing off their prison sentences, then carry on working for you. And we changed the lives of 200 men with zero reoffending. It was absolutely amazing. So when I got out in 2014, I was then funded to set up a social enterprise. We were originally called Prosper. We changed our name now to Bridge of Hope. And it was absolutely originally all focused up until the pandemic on supporting people with previous criminal record into jobs. Great stuff. The pandemic came along and we were asked essentially by the government, look, all this stuff that you're doing, can you please do it for a much wider group of people? If you recall, at that time, we were then contemplating 5 million plus unemployed people. So we expanded our remit to include people, oh my God, even older than me, mums returning to work, ex-soldiers, people from the LGBT community, anybody who felt that they were in some way being blocked from being able to get and then sustain a job that they really wanted. And with some cohorts of people, I particularly focus on women ex-offenders. If you provide this opportunity for a person to do a great job, you not only change one person's life, but you change the life of the family, you change the life of dependents, you change the whole network of that person. And living with that success that comes through the social value that can be created as a result of providing an opportunity through an ED&I lens is just so vital. The one other thing that I would say, Mitra, if I may, is Donald Trump will not be around forever. And while we have the turn-off of the ED&I space, this is very much picked up in Neil Armstrong's introduction to the report. While we have the momentary, and it will be a momentary move away from ED&I, it will come back. And the reason it will come back is if we exclude people from the workforce, how on earth are we going to get all those jobs done that hospitality depends on? We're currently working with in the construction space and with the scaffolding industry. Do you know the average age of scaffolders at the moment is 58? That's average age. If we don't have new people coming in to spaces right across industry, in every sector that you can ever imagine, we will simply run out of people. So we have to approach this from a social value perspective, a commercial perspective, and the sustainability perspective of if we want jobs done, we have to allow as broad a group of people as possible to be able to work. And I just cite as such a cracking example. I first saw it myself probably about 12 or 15 years ago with people who were probably actually older looking than me, working in B&Q. And what they had identified is, well, we need workers. What better than to employ women and men who actually look as if they know what they're doing, will dress them up in an apron, give them a spanner to stick out of the apron, and suddenly they become the go-to person in B&Q. I've done it myself. I've asked them about paint pots or lawnmowers, and it's great. And it's that simple. You know, you need staff. Let's go for it, and let's embrace a new cohort of people. There we are. Mitra, just in case I got cut off, sorry for the monologue.
You're there. Perfect. Thank you. I think that actually, you know, is lining up my next question that is in my mind, actually. But just to sort of go back to something you were saying, I mean, I'm hugely passionate about this, about giving second chances, especially to those who are you know, kind of a marginalised backgrounds, who have been, I don't like the word victim, but, you know, have had certain circumstances in life that have led them to where they ended up, and then don't have the same opportunities and are disadvantaged. So it's really important that we've got organisations like yours and Even Break out there to sort of help sort of, you know, with that good cause. And, you know, talking about the social value, absolutely, we all know this is the right thing to do. The data year on year, including in this report and others, tells you it is critical to have more diverse teams, inclusive cultures, you know, 45% more innovation, increased revenue. We know the data exists and the work that's been done around all of that sort of research around that. So I don't see, certainly from my client's perspective, I'm sure you'll say the same, I don't see that there is a kickback against the data and the evidence says it's the right thing to do. Neither do I, despite, you know, Donald Trump and his rhetoric, despite that, I don't really see a shift massively in D&I not being important. Language is changing, but as somebody that's worked in the inclusive culture space and, you know, kind of in the development space for nearly 20 years, we all recognize that language changes. And so if you want to make things happen, I'm not going to dress this up. We call it something different. We call it whatever we need to make it work. That's the real talk here, right? So I'm saying that, and it's, I certainly know that to be my experience. So whilst we might not be calling it EDI, DEI, or any of the other acronyms, it's still important work to us, certainly here in the UK and Europe. And even so in the US, it's just they have to operate in a very different way. Now, so if it is still important, but not urgent, and the reason I say but not urgent, that's because there are so many other competing priorities right now. Businesses have got so much more to deal with and think about in terms of the cost of running those businesses and employee costs, etc. What is the actual cost of waiting? Right? So if we are saying that to make this change happen, as well as having systems and processes in place that are you know, supporting all of the inclusive hiring practice and making sure that we have the great talent and nobody is missed out, and at least everybody has that equitable chance. What is the, you know, what's the consideration around the legal and reputational risk? Roisin, I'm going to come to you and sort of ask you, how would you, or how do you respond when your clients say something like that to you in terms of, you know, it's commercially smart, we know that.
Yeah.
It's not about being politically correct, but how does this happen?
Yeah, it's a difficult one because from a legal perspective, obviously we've got legal frameworks and we've got loads of stuff happening in the the Employment Act changes, and every week we're getting emails through updating one thing and another. And I probably would just say to anyone listening, having gone through things like furlough in the past, I definitely would not bother really getting too ingrained in it until they make actual decisions about which bits of the act they're actually going to bring in, because it's overwhelming. And I think we've got a real load of HR folks at the moment overwhelmed with these changes and, you know, what it means and how they're going to apply it and, you know, what policies they need to change, and actually forgetting the bit that is the people bit. You know, it's the actual human element of this that is so really important. And that, you know, some of those things, I know it sounds really awful, some of those things can come later when they're actually legally necessary. So from a prioritization point of view, I mean, certainly thinking about businesses that have got it right, you know, looking back at businesses that I've worked with previously, there was a fantastic law firm. It was still a fantastic law firm, and they really had a huge push on bringing in people that had come from different backgrounds. Because when you think about law, you think about, you know, well-spoken, well-educated, probably fairly middle-class folks coming in, probably quite white, you know, probably quite male, and they did loads and loads of work around it, and it's really changed the view of their business in the public eye. You know, as a company, they've done so much to bring, you know, disadvantaged folks into a world which really isn't, they wouldn't ordinarily have been there. You know, they've really gone out of the way to do a lot of outreach with schools and stuff like that. And I really respect it. I think it's something that's great and something that they've worked on, but they had a laser focus on that. That was the particular thing that they wanted to do. However, generally for businesses, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense at all to not be inclusive, because it's so easy these days. You just get on the internet, you know, you've got ChatGPT, can write you a grievance letter. You know, you don't even have to be employed to be able to raise to raise concerns about discrimination, you know, during either application or you know, the process going forward. So from a legal perspective, people have a lot more rights now than they used to. And so I think people do, you know, businesses do need to have an awareness of it, but they shouldn't be scared of it. If they're doing the right things, none of these legal frameworks really should make an enormous difference. I think one of my personal worries is around the immigration changes, because there are quite a few changes there for immigration. And my concern is that, you know, as a country, we are, you know, we're doing things a little bit Donald Trump-esque. You know, we are doing things where we're not making that connection with, we have jobs, they have skills. We might not have those skills, you know, locally or nationally, and we need to bring people in, and that is a worry, generally. But I do think from a point of view of recruitment, the whole, I keep going back to it, but the skills approach, that's the easy thing to do. Start writing, you know, start designing your jobs around skills, start writing your job descriptions around skills, advertise around skills, interview, or however you assess around the skills, and that's got to be your real basis to work on, and that costs nothing. If you don't know where to start, I know this is going to sound awful again, ChatGPT. If you really don't know where to start, get that to get you off a blank page, because I just love I love AI, and I really think it could work well. However, you've got to be dead careful, because obviously it's machine learning, and there's a potential for bias in that. So it's just making sure you cast your eye over it before you don't just, you know, print something out and use it, but certainly get it as an idea to get yourself started. But just be aware that there could be biases in there, and you might need to sort of reword it yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I think, you know, that really takes into account the level of D&I maturity of an organisation as well, you know, kind of where they are in terms of their level of knowledge and understanding. So to your point around skills and skills-based hiring, I'm certainly seeing this as being much more prevalent now, and people moving in towards that direction. Some actually moving away from anonymous CVs, which is interesting for me. But again, I think that the core aspect of moving towards and having much more sort of skills-based hiring approach is definitely, I'm seeing a lot more of that, I suppose, is what I'm saying. And the recognition of, yes, it's important, but perhaps not as urgent or as a higher priority. No one is really saying to me, we don't want to do this anymore. But I am hearing lots of, we are managing, we're looking to see what our priorities are and what we've got to do, kind of so that we can balance our book, so to speak, as we move forward. And I think it's really important to recognise that legal and reputational risk, as you were talking about, rather than it just being, you know, just about the sort of compliance elements and compliance aspects. But I think overall, if you're looking at the report and the shift from 24 and 25 in terms of the D&I maturity, in 24, my observation, or what I pulled out of the report, is that people were still feeling vulnerable, as I was saying, and kind of, you know, a fear on the candidate's part in terms of how and what data is going to be used and to what effect. I still even see this now with my colleagues within HR, who sometimes say, why would this question around, it's a socioeconomic question, why would that question be there on an application? And it's not really recognising that it's part and parcel of tracking the data and the information to understand the types of people that you are able to reach. And if you don't know that, if you're not tracking that and using a tool or a system to help you with that, you don't know, all these roads lead to nowhere, don't they, if you don't know where you're going. So how do you have a baseline if you don't start tracking it? So communication and being able to share the story and why you're doing what you're doing is critical to help with that journey and framing of that strategic requirement, as well as kind of calling of arms, you know, kind of calling people out, sort of say, help us to do this as an organisation. It's really critical to implementing that fairer hiring practice and changing the behaviour. Ultimately, that's what we're looking for. A change in behaviours, having the right tools, the right systems in place, and changing our behaviour so that we recognise our bias, as well as then saying, okay, how am I making this decision? Have I got a good panel of people working with me, if it's possible to do, as part of the recruitment process? You know, do we ask consistent questions? Have we got, you know, the video interviewing process? Is it accessible? Are we reaching all the people we need to? So lots of things to consider. And huge amounts of time that people have already put in to say, hey, there are tools out there that can help you do this. And to your point, if you don't have the finance and the sort of budget to be able to do everything, then there are some quick wins that you can do. But more important than anything, it's to keep moving forward, keep making those strides in the inclusive hiring space, and keep challenging yourselves to make sure that actually what you're doing is contributing towards that business performance you're looking for through that inclusive hiring practice. Yeah, so I guess, you know,
I wonder if that's the key, that when people say things like, we know that DE&I are important, but we're not doing it yet. It's like they're seeing DE&I as something separate from the business. And for me, that's where we've got it wrong. It isn't something it isn't that this is what we do as a business, and then over there is the DE&I bit. Everything we do in the business needs to be inclusive. So it's not just HR. It's research, it's marketing, it's product design, it's service design, it's all of those things. Because, and I think the way to help employers understand the business case for it is things like, if you're designing a product and then you find out subsequently that that group of people won't touch it with a barge pole for whatever reason. It might be because it's not accessible for some disabled people. It might be because it goes against a particular religion. It might be whatever it is. Then you've got to go back and change it and retrofit it, and your reputation's been damaged in the meantime. If your product design and your service design is done inclusively from the start, by including people with lived experience from different groups, then you're going to have a much wider customer base. So you're going to sell more products and services. You're going to make more money. So this isn't just about, oh, we need to find a black person to do a job. It isn't about that. It's about, how do we make sure that everything that happens within the company, whether it's how we allocate our budgets, how our recruitment process works, how we, as I say, research, talking to customers, all of that. If inclusion is included with the whole of the business functioning, then it becomes a necessary embedded part rather than something that's a bit separate and over there and bolt on and optional. And I think we've been talking about it wrongly in some ways, because for me, it should be embedded in every business process. It's not just about HR or recruitment, although both of those are really important. It's for every manager, every department, every function of a business to make sure that inclusion is embedded within what they do. It's going to be so much more profitable and better for the organisation, let alone, you know, the social impact that we're all very keen on.
Yeah,
I agree. Yeah, and I was just going to say that one of the things that we come across when I work with Mitra often is that businesses don't know where to start. They don't have that baseline. So one of the things that I recommend, you don't need people like me to do this. You can go and buy this yourself. But there's a couple of ISO standards that I think are really good. Where you can start, and if you're not measuring, you don't know, you can't manage stuff if you're not measuring stuff. And there's a really good section in ISO 30414, which is human capital management. I don't really like the name of it, but it does serve a purpose. And it's called D&I, which is ISO 30415. I think you can download them. Don't download them from BSI though, because they're more expensive. Go to Switzerland and do it in Swiss francs. But they are really good just to give you a framework and an idea. You don't have to be a HR specialist, you don't have to be a people practitioner, but it gives you some really good ideas of what you should be measuring. And when I work with Mitra and with different clients, what I do is I combine the two. There's no requirement to just follow one or the other. It's great to like combine the two, so you can have a look and look back. Where did I recruit these people from? What's the progression for Asian women in within a certain age range? You can pull all that data and start and get some really good analytics. And that's kind of my sweet spot. I like looking at that data and understanding where it's taking us, where we've had. You can see where a business has success and where it's got opportunities for improvement. And it's not to say. It's not going back to you must have 50% women, 50% men. It's not giving those measures and saying you're not doing well enough because you're not hitting these targets. It's just casting, shining a mirror really on shining a light or putting a mirror against the type of business that you've got, so you can see is my business working fairly in every sense, and it covers every single, you know, demographic you could think of, every single protected characteristic and beyond. But the other thing that's lovely is that you can pull it back from a finance perspective. So if you want to talk, because it's difficult, it's quite a lot of soft things, and people are thinking, well, how can you actually measure it? Well, you can, and you can get it back down to how much each role, each person, and each activity is worth in the business. It's great, and it's great for valuing companies if you want to sell it. So it's brilliant, love it.
Brilliant. Can I just build on that as well? I mentioned social value just a few minutes ago. I think what we just heard from Roisin is really important. It's understanding the data and the metrics. And you started this section of the conversation about how do we move forward from quick wins, you know, and actually gain the support of the rest of an organization. And I personally think, and I've seen this now in many examples, is by associating what we're trying to do here with the social value and its importance as the kind of new cryptocurrency in procurement. So if you as an organization want to win more business, then more likely than not, you're going to have to be able to showcase the social value that accrues as a result of you doing whatever job you're doing. And that can be IT outsourcing, or it can be landscaping a garden, or it can be building a building. And, you know, somewhere between 10 and 40% of the awarding marks now are given to social value. If you start with that principle, you've got to have the data. So back to Roisin's point, her model there, which I've used as well, is a great model. But then actually understanding what the financial proxy is of these amounts can then absolutely accelerate you up the prospective bidding shortlist for any particular contract. And you've also got that value that you're changing lives. So you've got that wonderful trilogy of great people doing the great job, changing people's lives, and the social value that accrues as a result of doing this, which is going to enable you to win the contract. It's great.
Yeah. And we are running out of time rapidly. James, I know that you want to jump in. You've got the hand raised there. I wish I could talk to you all more. James,
yeah, we've had a question through Mitch, but yeah, you might run a couple of minutes.
What I think we can do is try to answer the question, maybe, but also maybe we'll take that and answer it through LinkedIn or answer it afterwards.
Yeah, it's from Dottie. She said, what does the panel think about AI-driven pre-screening and recruitment? What are the watch-outs in respect to biases, and how do we overcome these? Maybe something we'll come back to in the next couple of webinars that we do.
Actually, yeah, that's a really good shout, because in the next one we are going to be focusing on how to make that strategy work smarter, not harder, and really kind of tracking that sort of fairness. So I think we'll continue and we'll pick up on this as we go forward, because that's really what this is about for me: accountability, as well as you know, that social impact, as you were talking about there. It's really important to be able to connect those two together. So, okay, if with permission, James, I think we should take that question and we'll respond to it.
Let's do that. Dottie, you've got to come on the next one now.
Yes, please do. If it's the same, if it's the person I'm thinking it is. And then also, I would like to say thank you to the panelists for joining us. What if you've got sort of one key takeaway that you want people to have in the last 2 minutes before I hand over to James? Jane, I'll come to you first. A key kind of parting shot.
Yeah, I think it's just don't think of it as DE&I. Think about it as getting and keeping the best talent.
Thank you. Roisin?
Yeah, I wish I could say something snappy, but I can't. You know,
Right.
I can't top that.
That's okay.
I think that's exactly what we need to do.
Brilliant. No problem. Michael?
Oh, measure through the lens of social value. There are metrics out there and proxies that you can build into any model that you've got, and use social value. Have that as your absolute 101 principle whenever you start this on ground zero, and you won't go wrong.
Thank you. And I guess my sort of parting shot really is to echo probably what all of you have said, which is don't wait. It is important. It is urgent. Don't wait for the next budget. Don't wait for the employment bill. Don't wait for these things. Do what you need to do now as much as you can, and then continue to evolve it. Thank you. James, I'm going to hand back over to you.
Thanks, Mitra, and our fantastic, wonderful panel. I really hope that's been enlightening and interesting. And thank you to everyone who's attended for spending an hour with us this afternoon in what I know will be an incredibly busy schedule. We look forward to seeing you all for webinar 2, and watch out for details on that coming out shortly with a follow-up email from today. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.